Welcome to today's episode of Fire on the Mountain podcast, where we will discuss the Democratic candidate debate that took place on Tuesday, April 12th, give y'all some information about candidates on our primary ballots, and talk about the school board ahead of our interview with Mary Ellen Kustin, school board candidate. We'll also cover the recent decision by Florida lawmakers that has the country deeply concerned, and the most recent decision by Macon County Board of Elections regarding Mark Meadows.
Let's light it up. I don't know how we're gonna do that. We'll do that whenever we meet, I guess.
Okay, that sounds good. Let's light it up.
Cool. Is that good? Right now, there are 13 functioning congressional districts in the state. But North Carolina's 14th congressional district will be a new congressional district in the United States House of Representatives, created after the 2020 United States Census. This newly created district, based in the west of Charlotte, was drawn by a 3-judge panel in the Wake County Superior Court as part of a remedial map for the 2022 United States House of Representatives elections. Cities in the district will include most of Charlotte, Gastonia, Mount Holly, and Belmont.
Most of our listeners probably live in Congressional District 11, which includes most of western North Carolina. In fact, it includes 15 counties out of 100 in the state, or almost a fifth. 7 Republican candidates for North Carolina's 11th district seat squared off in a debate Monday night at the WNC Ag Center as the May 17th primary inches closer. Madison Cawthorn, who is the incumbent congressional candidate, did not attend, but others did, including Matthew Burrell, Chuck Edwards, Rod Honeycutt, Wendy Navarez, Bruce O'Connell, Christy Sluter, and Michelle Woodhouse. Key takeaways were criticism of the Biden administration, inflation being a, quote, kitchen table issue, and security on the southern border of the United States. Other topics were constituent services, Representative Kevin McCarthy, abortion, drug trafficking, journalism, the Trump presidency, the crisis in Ukraine, the 2020 presidential election, COVID-19, infrastructure, and more.
On Tuesday, April 12th, Democrats had their own debate, which led to some enlightening and telling comments from our candidates. Dr. Chris Cooper, Director of Public Policy at Western Carolina, moderated that debate on behalf of the McDowell County Democratic Party. And takeaways here were the need to unseat loose cannon Madison Cawthorn, whose most recent behavior, like pretending to out other unnamed politicians for, quote, doing key bumps, has landed him on the bad side of both parties. At one point in the debate, we unfortunately heard from candidate Bynum Lunsford, who said, quote, "We had a black president, black mayors, black police chiefs. Everywhere there are blacks. I don't know what the problem is. There is no problem. I'm sorry." End quote. He obviously received backlash and was asked if he was, in fact, a Democrat by the other Democratic candidate at the table, Jay Carey.
This comment from Lunsford prompted me to do some digging into his platform, because it was a genuinely confusing comment that seemed apropos of nothing. And his website does explain some things. The site criticizes, quote, tearing down monuments and, quote, trying to overthrow the government, but doesn't give any specifics. I'm also not interested in giving his platform any more time, so let's move on.
Here. We're done with that. Hold up.
Rap's gonna go downstairs and grab a beer.
Yeah, I got the beer. We're good with the beer. Check. So, Gina, the Florida legislature is now willing to allow Governor Ron DeSantis to take the lead on redrawing the state's 28 congressional districts, which is obviously a highly unusual move that will probably diminish black political power in the state and allow Republicans to further distort the state's map to their advantage. State legislatures, including Florida's, usually draw a proposal for a plan that the governor approves or rejects. DeSantis vetoed the GOP-controlled legislature's proposed congressional districts on March 29th after proposing his own map that would increase the number of GOP seats while eliminating 2 districts represented by Black Democrats. Leaders in the legislature said on Monday that they would not try to draft a new plan ahead of a special session next week, but instead were waiting for DeSantis, a likely 2024 presidential candidate, to submit his own plan. In a memo on Monday, legislative leaders said, quote, "We are awaiting a communication from the governor's office with a map that he will support. Our intention is to provide the governor's office opportunities to present that information before House and Senate redistricting committees." The legislature approved a plan earlier this year that would have given Republicans an 18-10 advantage in the state's delegation, and DeSantis' proposal would give Republicans a staggering 20-8 advantage.
This is very familiar considering what we just went through with gerrymandering and redistricting in North Carolina.
Absolutely. And DeSantis appears focused on eliminating 2 congressional districts with sizable non-white populations, which also sounds incredibly familiar.
It sure does.
One of those is Florida's 5th congressional district, which stretches from Jacksonville to Tallahassee. It's 46% black and represented by Al Lawson, a black Democrat. He's also targeted the state's 10th congressional district, which is majority non-white and is represented by Val Demings, another black Democrat. Lawson recently said in a statement, quote, "The Florida legislature is caving to the intimidation of DeSantis and his desire to create additional Republican seats in Congress by eliminating minority access districts. Again, I'm not surprised but disappointed with the legislature's inability to fulfill their constitutional duties as elected officials without political interference from DeSantis," end quote.
So it looks like we've got the ACLU on the side of democracy as usual, calling it unprecedented and undemocratic to essentially shove off the responsibility of redistricting to the governor, which is part of the legislature's role and the reason that we have the legislative branch as part of checks and balances. Like, this is absolutely wild, especially because we were so up close and personal with it recently. So they've also recently added a district, just like we did.
Yep.
As a result of population growth within the last census. So this was part of the way that he was able to get away with the gerrymandering that he's doing right now.
Yeah, it's sort of like, I guess precedent is everything, right? So like, sort of like what happened, and I don't really want to give any time here outside of just pointing it out on this podcast, but what also happened this week was Oklahoma's it's just straight up anti-abortion bill that passed in Oklahoma. But I feel like what a lot of what's trending in the states is to sort of like create precedent to be challenged. Like, what we're seeing is money in politics creating leadership that is writing laws to be challenged in a continuously like more and more politicized state and federal like judiciary. And he even anticipates, like specifically with this story, Ron DeSantis anticipates that it's going to go to court. But Ron DeSantis himself is a former congressman, and he's eager for that fight. He's also taking aim at a 2010 amendment to the Florida Constitution, overwhelmingly approved by voters, that sets guardrails on the redistricting process itself. Part of that amendment says that districts cannot be drawn to abridge, quote, "the equal opportunity of racial or language minorities to participate in the political process or to diminish their ability to elect representatives of their choice," end quote. And in March, Ron DeSantis himself said that, quote, "I think our dispute very well may lead to saying that Florida's redistricting amendments are not consistent with the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause." And Republicans currently hold a 6-1 majority on the Florida Supreme Court. So
he's opposed to, or in favor of an amendment.
So
says that.
that's what's really confusing about the current situation. A lot of people that I've seen online in response to this think that there's something that could be said about exposing loopholes here. And I mean, kind of straw man arguments. I see that kind of circulating where like he's just creating this this environment where he can exploit loopholes in, state laws as they pertain to like the Constitution. It's back and forth. It seems like nobody really knows what's going on. Max,
which is how he wants it.
Right, yeah. And Max Stipanovich, who's a longtime Republican strategist in Florida, who has since left the party, told the Washington Post that Republicans were, quote, prostrating themselves for the governor. And he goes on to say that it's all about maintaining and acquiring power and holding office. And what we're witnessing is a mile marker on the road to one-man rule in Florida, at least for the time being, end quote.
Yeah, I'm reading right here that it says DeSantis acknowledged whatever map is ultimately picked will be challenged in court.
Yeah, and a redistricting expert at the Brennan Center for Justice tweeted that the rationale is head-spinning and inconsistent. That person's name's Michael Lee. The governor's office essentially argued that the maps violated the U.S. Constitution by taking race into account too much, and the Florida Constitution was violated for taking race into account too little.
And is he arguing that he's allowed to redraw maps based on both of those?
It looks that way. It's just scary.
Yeah, it is. Ron DeSantis particularly is constantly at the head of the game of scary things. This quote from him on Tuesday says he will, quote, have North Florida drawn in a race-neutral manner. We're not going to have a 20-mile gerrymander that divvies people up based on the color of their skin. That is wrong. That is not the way we have governed in the state of Florida. So going back to those precedents of saying we can't use this congressional redistricting process because that's not the way that we've done it before. So it violates our state constitution to do it this way now. When in fact it was a response to underrepresentation of marginalized groups in Florida. And he's already vetoed one potential map that was given to him by Republican legislators. So I wonder if that's why they're not doing it again, because they've already drawn one up, had it vetoed, and had him say publicly that he's going to make a new one that will be challenged in court.
I want to say that I think it's a gambit to appeal to unaffiliated voters across the state and to left-leaning unaffiliated voters to show that he's not a racist. He's railed against what he calls COVID theater. He's tried to, give mayors of cities that flood a lot. He's done like resource allocation. He's while he's at the cutting edge of a lot of fucked up shit, he's also doing the political work that he's doing. The compromise work is these performative statements about, not doing shit based on the color of people's skin and the gerrymander and things like that. Like, you know that there's something brewing there. And also Donald Trump lives in his state, and he's, a favorite going into 2024 for a presidential election. Like he's doing a lot of legwork now to create receipts for the future. And it's pretty apparent. It's just that because it's all self-serving and in his interests, like by the time he makes a bid for president, he'll have a whole ass state whose entire democratic process was basically drafted in order for him to be a more electable presidential candidate. So I don't want to go too deep into it because it's Florida and it's not here, and we have to keep. I want this podcast to, like, my involvement in this podcast to keep as much space for here as possible. So it was Yeah.
Well, we do have a lot. I mean, I think it's reasonable to include a little bit of it. The strategy that DeSantis is using is part of the reason that it's so important to educate ourselves and others on this is exactly what we talk about when we talk about the dangers of colorblindness.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, you don't get to not see race when you're a white man. Like, you don't get to say that. You don't get to say that you feel like it's not racially equitable to divide communities up like that, when in fact he's likening it to segregation, and what it is in fact is representation.
Right.
And I hope that our voters in North Carolina are smart enough, educated enough, care enough, give enough of a shit to realize that that's a smokescreen for
I guess
irresponsible representation.
You see those similarities between what Bynum Lunsford had said in that debate and, what Ron DeSantis is saying about, the Florida Fifth. You see similarities there. And then also I do want to point out that it's critical for North Carolina voters to understand that we would be the next Oklahoma, we would be the next Idaho, we would be the next Florida with our GOP supermajority, if not for our Governor Roy Cooper's veto power. A lot that's been brought before him has been vetoed. There's similarities in these stories, right? There's one running narrative here that we just have to keep our eyes on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's important to identify and verbalize that is the strategy of the right, that it is a clear strategy, that they're taking this discussion about race and culture and community and turning it into kind of like inverting it.
Mm-hmm.
And making it about being racist instead of hearing and responding to community needs.
Right.
And I think it's pretty transparent when there aren't any people who aren't white working with DeSantis or saying things like this. Like, this is the prerogative of one privileged white man who thinks that he knows better than the people within their own communities how to govern them and how to lead and how they can represent themselves, which is racism.
What privilege we have to look from 3 states away and to say, oh, that's messed up, right? But like, to be working all the time and just totally apolitical and not even care, and to not even, just all these communities just being tokenized by someone that they don't even know, like they're just not even aware of it happening,
Yeah, that also harkens back to our conversation with Jair Castillo and Hunter Ogletree, right? That they talk about being tokens for an election.
Yeah.
And getting built up and talked about and included for one election cycle and then being thrown to the curb again, which is what DeSantis has proved over and over again he will do.
Yeah.
Well, that's gross and frustrating.
Yeah.
I mean, my initial thought when you told me that DeSantis was going to be responsible for drawing his maps in his own state was, well, at least it'll get to court like ours did in North Carolina.
Well, it will. It'll get to their 6-1, conservative majority court.
Yeah, which he is counting on. So, like, joke's on us, because there's no checks and balances there.
Right.
So I want to talk a little bit about the Board of Education before Mary Ellen comes on. The Board of Education is responsible for creating, supporting, and implementing school policies. During COVID, that was a highly contested subject because we were talking about whether children should be in or out of school, particularly whether they should be masked or unmasked. We heard a lot from parents and families about their concerns with both, with masking and not masking, with being in school and not being in school. And the weight of those decisions falls on the Board of Education, which is made up of 7 people who are members of the community. So at this point, in the intense partisanship that we experience everywhere, and specifically in our community, being on the Board of Education comes with a lot of scary new elements like death threats that have caused some members to step down and have really kind of convoluted the position from being one of support for our teachers and students into being one that's politicized and has become partisan, and I think therefore is much less useful to the community. So I'm excited to have Mary Ellen Kustin on as someone who's running for the Board of Education who comes from a family of teachers, because I think that we need more focus from the Board of Education on the specific issues that our students, families, and educators face in the school, rather than creating this kind of partisan dynamic that we've been fostering and allowing for 2 years now.
Right. One thing that really kind of messed with my head, it's kind of like it's like a hard pill to swallow, was I was watching Saturday Night Live maybe like, I don't know, 3 months ago or something. That was longer than that. It's fucking April. This had to be, I guess, September. And there was, there was a skit where it was like school board meetings around the country. And the skit was making fun of like conspiracy theorists coming in with like their, the cabal of the Clintons and this and that, the QAnon theories and everything. And it was a joke in an SNL skit. Like, this is what it
right. Like, oh, how silly. Can you imagine if this really happened?
Right. Yeah. And what really like kind of fucked with me was that like I sat in on those meetings where people like talked about shit like that. Like I was in there where it's all well and good, and it's a funny fucking punchline when you're up in New York City and you're not living in the countryside where people are threatening your family and your lives and doxing your relatives and friends and lovers and trying to break into your house. It goes on. Like, these people, what these people have experienced since that sensational politicization of education, leading now in a tangible way to like getting rid of books. And I mean, I watch kids groomed, like they were reading speeches their parents wrote, like kids like younger than 10 reading words on a piece of paper that their parents wrote for them to read in public.
At school board meetings?
In public comment at school board meetings, yeah.
About how they don't feel safe wearing masks and they want to go back to school and stuff like that? Or did you see it on both sides? I was just assuming that it was you assumed correctly. That's exactly right. Like, it was not safe wearing masks. It was about how it wasn't healthy and how they've got coughs and this study by this person and this person says this, and like the reference. Oh wow! So they're doing some peer-reviewed research at 9 years old. That's great. So school does work.
Well, homeschooling apparently, because they were, pulled out because they refused to wear, masks or whatever.
But keep homeschooling them then if you do such a good job.
Yeah, but then we get more Florida.
I know. No, that's not the answer. Don't keep homeschooling your kids, y'all. They need to be somewhere where they can be part of a community. This is the thing about the that's the thing about making it overly political, is that homeschooling has a ton of advantages, and generally speaking, I fully support it.
Yeah.
And now it's become a political thing where people want to reject the concerns that most of us have about homeschooling. And when I say us, I mean the general public, as well as specifically educators and people who are trained in early childhood. And we see that children who are homeschooled are more likely to suffer abuse and not have anyone to talk to and not have anyone to check in on them. And we know that their education is not necessarily as comprehensive as a public schools would be. And we also know that there are lots of problems with public schools. And I feel like all of that should be able to live under one umbrella of like sane and genuine and reasonable concerns, but they're divided now.
Yeah. I did see a quote recently that kind of hit the nail on the head for me, where somebody had said, public education does not exist to teach children what their parents want them to know. Public education exists to teach children what society requires them to understand.
Yes, that gave me chills. That is exactly it. That's exactly it. It's what they need to know. It's not what you want them to know.
Right. That whole trickle-down Reaganomics effect, but with politics and with kids, it starts at the top with Trump, and the next thing you know, it's, parents feeding their kids lines out of, QAnon cult to read to other adults and to, tokenize their innocence. And it keeps materializing and metastasizing in different ways. And now these fucking kids can't even read. I think I saw Kite Runner, or I never read Catcher in the Rye.
Oh, yeah, Kite Runner's on the list of things they can't read. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, which is the only reason I can think. Have you read that book?
No, I started to, and I couldn't finish it. I'm notorious.
It's a lot.
I'm notorious for starting. Like, I only want to read really good ones, and they just become overwhelming, and I'm notorious for not finishing them.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty comprehensive look at life during wartime.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I can imagine that you wouldn't want your children to have a grasp on global events is racism. I mean, I might not want to commit to saying that on the pod, but like between us, what's the other reason? Why else wouldn't you want your kid to know what goes on in Afghanistan and Syria and like
nationalism justifying their wars,
right?
Like giving you empathy, to like understand why those people are fighting with themselves, like
yeah. And Catcher in the Rye, you haven't read that either, you said?
I've never read it. No,
You're too old now. You have to have read it when you were like 15 for it to matter. Because now you'd read it and be like, what the fuck? But like when you're in high school and you read it, you're like, oh my god, like this kid gets it. Fuck everybody. Like apathy's the answer. Nihilism, whatever. Mm-hmm. And the main character has like an encounter with a sex worker that I think is why a lot of people don't like it read in schools, but it's harmless. I mean, what happens is he rents a hotel room, he asks a sex worker to come into the room with him, and he can't follow through because he's so uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So it's really like a cute coming of age interaction with sex, which like, sorry, even if your kid's homeschooled, if they're 15, they know about sex. 15, yeah. I mean, give me a fucking break.
Yeah. I should say I did watch the movie Kite Runner, and it was incredible. I definitely love the movie. I just I never finished the book.
Oh, okay, so you know the story.
Yeah, I'm familiar with
I haven't seen the movie.
It's really good.
Hell yeah, I would totally watch it.
But we should move on. Yeah. My last bit is about our wonderful gentleman, astute gentleman, magnificent man god, Mark Meadows.
I'm leaving all that in, and I'm gonna take it out of context.
So Mark Meadows was removed from the North Carolina voter rolls this week as the state investigation into allegations that the former Trump chief of staff committed voter fraud continues. It was the Macon County Board of Elections Director, Melanie Tybalt, that confirmed that she removed Meadows' registration from the county's voter roll on Monday. Tybalt said that, quote, Macon County... Tybalt told CNN that Macon County administratively removed the voter registration of Mark Meadows as he lived in Virginia and last voted in the 2021 election there. The registration removal was first reported by the Asheville Citizen-Times, and Tybalt said that Virginia had not informed North Carolina that Meadows had registered to vote in that state. A spokesperson for Meadows, who happens to be a former North Carolina congressman, has declined to comment on his removal from the North Carolina voter rolls. But records show that the last election Meadows voted in Macon County, North Carolina, was the 2020 general election. He voted by absentee mail in that election, and a ballot request form for Meadows was submitted the first week of October in 2020 with a request to send the ballot to Alexandria, Virginia. So Meadows' wife, Deborah, dropped this completed ballot off at an early voting location on October 26, 2020.
Yeah, so last month, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation confirmed to CNN that its Special Investigations Unit was investigating allegations that Meadows registered to vote in 2020 at a home where he never resided. This investigation is being carried out in conjunction with the North Carolina State Board of Elections. It also followed a report in New Yorker magazine that said that Meadows registered to vote weeks before the 2020 election at a mobile home in Macon County, where he allegedly never lived or even visited. But his wife says that she, quote, reserved the house for 2 months at some point within the past few years, but that she couldn't remember exactly when, and that they only spent 1 or 2 nights there. And then she said that Meadows himself had never even spent a night there.
I remember seeing a picture of this. Anybody listening, please Google this story. It is hilarious. Like, if you look at the trailer looks, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to say anything more about the trailer, but definitely Google it if you can, because it looks pretty scary.
It doesn't look like where a congressman who was appointed by Trump to be in an official position and then moved to Washington, D.C. would rent a couple of nights?
Well, no. It also doesn't look like anything I would on, like, my most strung out weekend rent for a couple of nights.
Oh, man.
Yeah, the State Bureau of Investigation spokesperson Anjanette Grube told reporters at CNN that the State Bureau of Investigation's investigation into potential voter fraud allegations concerning Mark Meadows remains ongoing, and at present there is no additional information that's available. But I mean, it's still pretty crazy, you know. It's the just the bottomlessness of this party, and from state to state, branch to branch, from the judiciary, state and federal, to the Congress, state, federal, the Senate, state and federal. I mean, it's...
Yeah, I would love to put together a little, like, reel of all of the clips of Mark Meadows alleging voter fraud of other people and other parties.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big sword to fall on there for someone whose entire campaign was about voter fraud.
Yeah. Kind of harkens me to Brian Kemp.
Yeah. Oh, Brian Kemp. Damn. Oh, Alabama.
That was Georgia, Gina.
Oh, Georgia.
Because that led to Stacey
Georgia.
Abrams. It was Stacey Abrams, Brian.
Yeah, I knew that. Okay. One of our sponsors today is the Honey House of Vintage, owned by our dear friend Mariah. The Honey House of Vintage features clothing and accessories from the 1950s to 2000 for all styles, subcultures, and body types. Open noon to 5 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday. Light tailoring and alterations and consignment available by appointment. Find us on Facebook or call 388-5373 for more info. Mention the ad for 10% off purchase.
Mary Ellen Kustin, candidate for Board of Education in Henderson County, is our guest for today. She has a bachelor's degree in mathematics and a master's degree in sustainable development and conservation biology, as well as a master's degree in public policy. She also has 2 children who will be in the Henderson County public school system through 2037. Mary Ellen, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for having me. It's a joy to be here. I have to say that all those credentials, probably the ones that are even more relevant, are that I'm the daughter of 2 educators, I'm the wife of a school psychologist, and I'm the product of public schools myself. I have a quality Southern public education behind me, and I was blessed to go to multiple blue ribbon schools, and I want that for every single kid in Henderson County.
You were the first candidate to file for school board as soon as filing opened. What prompted you to run this time around? Or had you already considered running in years past?
No, I had not considered running in years past. And frankly, our national politics were getting ugly. And I moved from a bigger city to be closer to family here in Hendersonville. And, really wanted to believe that neighbors get along with neighbors, and the way that we're going to heal as a country is to come together. And, more than that, you don't have a democracy without a robust public education. And seeing folks either take our democracy for granted or frankly attack it, we need as much, understanding of other people's perspectives and quality education as we can get. And with my kids going into the public schools, thought it'd be a good place for me to take my skill set of knowing, policy, having a math degree, so I know my way around a budget, can invest taxpayer dollars wisely. Just seemed like a worthwhile endeavor.
How do we word this? What are why schools? What are how and why do if schools?
Mary Ellen, why schools?
Great question. Let's start there. Actually, let's. Mary Ellen, why schools?
I feel like that's actually a question she's probably very equipped to answer.
Well, I don't even know.
Why schools?
Why schools? For a lot of reasons. We saw during the pandemic, for instance, the rift grow wider between folks with a lot of resources and those without. So if we heard from folks over at Safelight and that work with other nonprofits that help folks, that schools tend to be the safe and stable place for kids in our community. So if we are not providing that, and we're not providing, breakfast and lunch, access to stable adults and role models, as well as, reading, writing, arithmetic, we're doing a disservice to our community, and we're all worse off for it. So what we need to do is make sure that we have those, institutions in place that help us thrive as a community. That's why schools, Rafi.
That makes sense. Thank you for answering that question.
Did you want to try that other one?
No, because you answered it.
Kind of does answer the same one.
The question was, what do you feel the public...
Is there more to that specific question that you would like to say, though? Are there more specific services or better education standards that you feel that the school system is responsible for providing?
Yeah, we should back up a little bit and appreciate that there is no constitutional obligation for our federal government to provide education in any capacity. North Carolina's constitution does require that. So North Carolina must provide a sound basic education to everyone here, and that's been held up in the Constitution through court orders and as well as state laws. So that means that North Carolina is responsible for teaching reading, writing, and speaking English, as well as science, math, and history, as well as setting kids up for success post secondary education as well as or vocational schools.
And they've decided exactly, they've enumerated what they mean by sound basic education because of the Leandro case.
Mm. Yeah. Well, we'll I guess I see where you're
Look at this organic conversation segueing. I love it. Yeah. So, but it's that's the floor, right? So the floor is the basic education, the safe place to be. But it's more than that. It's community. It's bringing, it's kids learning through other kids as well as their teachers. And that is something you can't I've been home with my kiddos during the pandemic. It's been wonderful. It's been exhausting. And it's been so eye-opening to see that I can provide so much. We can do cool hands-on activities, all this experiential learning. But at the end of the day, I'm still their mom, and they know I love them unconditionally. And they've never had, their fellow kindergarten girl cut them one good look to be like, that's inappropriate, little man. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I feel like peer pressure gets a bad rap for good reasons, because bad things can happen from it. But the, socializing and civilizing as a people happens when you get together as a group. And schools are such a fabulous way for that to happen.
Absolutely. And that happens as young as the preschool setting, that children that are 2 and 3 and learning about social structure will make their own rules.
Absolutely.
And they'll decide, that's okay for you to do to me, or that's not okay, or actually that was mine first, or whatever.
Yeah.
It totally builds in those early years.
Yeah, absolutely. We are social beings. And,
yes.
And we need each other for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's really no escaping it,
Mm-hmm.
Eventually you're going to have to immerse yourself into the real world. And that is part of what we saw with deciding what a sound basic education is, right? Is that there were specific pieces that discuss readying a child to exist in their community as adults.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is harder to nail down because it's a little more subjective.
Yeah.
I think the last time that we tried to enforce Leandro through the courts was 2014.
There was a ruling 2021. Are you on the Googles?
Yeah.
Yeah, we need the Googles.
I think November 21 was when we passed a budget, but they did have, another. Oh, it was around the budget that the judge said you needed to actually pay up. So that's, the state legislature has refused to fully fund Leandro.
Right.
And so they are in violation of the state constitution. But never mind, they've been in violation by not passing a budget for 2 years. So when they finally got around to passing a budget, they put a little money towards Leandro, but they didn't actually fully fund it.
Okay, so let's back up so that we have a solid
Yep.
thing. But yeah, this stuff is so fascinating and so upsetting and affects so many of us. It's wild.
Right.
So for folks at home, just a sidebar on Leandro whenever we hear that. In 1997, in Leandro versus State, the North Carolina Supreme Court held that the state constitution's right to education is a, quote, right to a sound, basic education. An education that does not serve the purpose of preparing students to participate and compete in the society in which they live and work is devoid of substance and is constitutionally inadequate, end quote. The court remanded this case for a trial and enumerated the criteria for a, quote, sound basic education, which reflect the guidelines set forth by the Kentucky Supreme Court in Rose versus Council for Better Education.
Yeah. So could I also add that according to the courts, North Carolina public schools must be staffing each classroom with a competent, well-trained teacher, staffing each school with a competent, well-trained principal, and this gets a little bit to what you're saying, and identifying and distributing the necessary resources to ensure that all children have an equal opportunity to obtain that sound and basic education. So not only putting the right administrators and teachers in place, but the resources, which is political speak for dollars, to make sure that everyone's got what they need to actually get it across. And that sound basic education includes the ability to read, write, and speak English, understand basic math, science, and history, and develop skills to enable successfully engaging in post-secondary education or vocational training. So those are the definitions, basically.
Well, you clearly have no idea what you're talking about.
I agree with them all 100%, not only because they're the law, but because they make common sense. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're not working to have quality schools, what are you doing? And, we see that from folks who clearly want to starve the resources of our schools, are working hard to, get vouchers for private schools, get vouchers for public charters, or whatever they're doing that aren't playing by the same rules as the public schools. And it's fine. And there's niche ways for you to, some folks want to go to a Christian academy, that's fine. Some kids want to do homeschool, that's fine. But frankly, for 100 years and now, the majority of kids go to public school. So if you're going to public school, we need it to be of the same quality, as a minimum, as a floor, so that we're actually providing what needs to be provided so that everyone's thriving.
And those resources that we talk about as far as like equipping each student to be able to obtain that basic education, I feel like from what I understand, like scientifically, that would be your basic resources, right? That, like, if you used Maslow's hierarchy and you started at the beginning, which we can link or put in our Instagram if we keep this in. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a structure that indicates the way that we can receive new information and grow fully. So it starts at the beginning with your basic needs being food, shelter, water. So your physical needs have to be met before you can move on to
safety. One of the basic ones, it feels like
safety.
Physiological safety.
So after you've met your physiological needs, you're then able to access the resources to meet your safety needs. But the general idea, right, is that if you're teaching a child math and expecting them to have the faculties to understand mathematics, it's not reasonable to ask them to maintain their attention or to be able to focus their time and effort or to be able to go home and do homework if they don't have a place to go. Mm-hmm. So it comes down to this really basic understanding that has been proven through science that the resources needed to equip a child to learn include food, water, shelter, and safety. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that is where we get tripped up when it comes to comprehensive plans like Leandro, where we say the state's required to make sure that children are able to learn, and then we run into politics of who should provide what for whom. So there we circle back around to what schools should provide to students.
Yeah.
Sidebar on Maslow's real quick. Some indigenous academics have speculated that his theories, including the hierarchy itself, may have been directly influenced by the teachings of the Blackfeet tribe.
Yeah.
And I did not know that at all.
Yeah.
So, rhetorical question. You were definitely able to attend school board meetings in the past couple of years.
Correct.
What for you was a major, we'll start with a positive takeaway from a lot of the school board meetings that you attended in Henderson County.
Sure. So the majority of them in the last 2 years have been online that I've attending in air quotes. And huge kudos to Henderson County Public Schools tech folks who made that happen. They turned that around quickly. They enabled us to submit public comment over the internet, and right during the pandemic, I didn't go in person for many of them because for a while neither of my kids were old enough to be vaccinated. I didn't want to bring home germs, and then still my 3-year-old is not old enough to be vaccinated. So we were just trying to limit our exposure. And my husband works in public schools in Rutherford County as a school psychologist, so he is in a lot of different schools and in a lot of with populations of kids who can't wear masks. So we were just being extra cautious. So unfortunately, I was unable to go in person to a lot of the meetings over the last 2 years, but I'm back, baby, and I'm there every meeting. Mm-hmm. The rooms have gotten a lot quieter. It's nice that the energy level has resumed almost back to a normal level. But for a while, it was tense. It was incredibly tense. People were saying some pretty ugly things, and it wasn't, and I absolutely think everyone should have their voice heard. And I am so thrilled that we were able to write public comment, compose thoughts, put them out. If you want to get up there and say them, great. But to remember that the level of decorum in any setting, especially one where it is related to schools. So we, as the adults in the room, are literally the role models for kids at all times. And I think people had a hard time remembering that. They got really hot and bothered about masks on all sides of the issue. People were saying things that, weren't as thoughtful and, considering other people's experiences as they could have been. So that was certainly something I'd like to see changed and something that is changing. But I'm so thrilled that everyone had the opportunity to give their thoughts and will continue to do that. It's just sort of disappointing that fewer people are showing up to give any thoughts when it actually comes to what's going on in our schools. One really big, a few other big positives from the last couple of years. We have had an incredible superintendent. Dr. John Bryant has been just present and professional and poised, and I didn't mean to make that all alliteration, but he is just so
presidential.
He's so good at his job. Yep. I just want to say pterodactyl just to be silly, but
This is an audio format.
To think that he's a homegrown fella, that he came to be our superintendent after working his way up through the school system and being present and being a force of what you call him, a cosmic good,
Cosmic positive.
cosmic positive, yeah. and there's such huge shoes to fill, and to see that our school board now is going to be spending a lot of time doing this national search to find the next John Bryant, the next superintendent, is heartbreaking. I'm really sad that he's had to find another gig.
How do you feel about that?
I think we're missing something huge. I think it's a real disservice to our community that we didn't get to keep him longer.
So, can you talk a little bit about some wins that you've seen recently in the education field as it pertains to our community? We've talked a lot about the way that our community is growing, and I'm wondering kind of what gives you momentum to keep going and what gets you excited about working in education in our community.
Yeah, cool question. So the pandemic was awful, but one cool thing that came out of it were dollars to do enrichment over the summer. And I've heard from teachers and parents who've been involved with that it is so fulfilling and so interesting, and their kids are so excited to be a part of it. It was not open to everyone yet. It was open to, trying to do the most good with the fewest bucks they had, which is great. But what we're hearing is we want to do that every summer. We want to do, keep that summer slide from happening where kids get rusty between, Memorial Day and Labor Day, and expanding that is excellent. And a lot of the money was spent on experiential learning, which I think is key to success. So that's the hands-on learning. It looks different at different grades. If you're a high school kid, you might be writing computer code that then you put into making a robot work, and that is cool, and that is hands-on. If you're my kid who's 5, you might be spending 2 hours in a mud puddle in my backyard, but getting a lot of enrichment out of it. Another thing that's been fun to hear about at the school board meetings, and when Dr. Fry speaks about this specifically in the inclusion portion of the meeting, usually towards the end, but she's been talking about a pilot program they're putting in to attract more students into the profession of teaching.
Is there anything specific that you would like for the school board to tackle as far as issues that are going on locally? Anything that you feel like needs to be brought to the forefront that's kind of not getting addressed adequately now?
Yeah, great question. Yes, and as a citizen, as a mom of an incoming kindergartner, I've certainly made my thoughts known to the school board on this, but would be honored to actually take it up with them, at the table as a school board member for sure. So a few things. We've talked about the Leander plan some, and it's tricky that the funding that comes to schools, the biggest chunk of the pie comes from state funding. So that is where the Leander plan is not being fully funded through our state budget. The next piece of the pie in size is local dollars, and then some federal dollars. So it's hard to talk about bringing in the resources we need when most of them are coming from the state. And we are, the county is where the school board is. So it's working with county commissioners, but it's also putting pressure on state legislatures. And I've seen some of our school board members really come to life around an issue of calendars and scheduling. So we have provisions in state law around when schools or public schools have to start and finish, and they're based on summer commerce, right? So it's when families are going on vacation, it's when super cheap high school kid labor is aplenty, and it has these rules around when we can have what these calendars look like have very little to do with actually are we serving our students well. So for instance, if your school year starts late enough that suddenly now you're taking your exams after winter break, that stinks. Who wants to be studying for their exams over winter break or having panic attacks if they're not studying for their exams over winter break, right? And a lot of older kids are even more affected. I mentioned exams. Kindergartners don't take a whole lot of exams, but so the kids that feel this the most are usually the older kids, right? And so the parents don't realize this until they're in it. and it's suddenly like, oh, but these have been the rules around the calendar forever, so we can't change it now. And it's like, ooh, but I didn't know about it. Like, this is the thing I was supposed to be upset about. Also, if you're over taking some courses at Blue Ridge Community College, and your school year is going so long, and then you suddenly can't apply, you can't start your next chapter, your next school life, or actually meet up with the community college and what they're doing. They've been doing like special scheduling because of our asinine rules around it. Like that's not serving anyone, right?
Right.
And for kids who want to graduate early. So again, if you're trying to graduate like in the winter time and move on to a vocational career or college or a job or whatever you got going on, you suddenly can't do that because you can't actually graduate until you take those exams. So it's all been very silly. This year coming up happens to be the worst version of that calendar. And it's based on just the, calendar plus these weird stipulations have just aligned. The stars have aligned in a way that make it pretty terrible for how it's going to be. And there have been some school board members who have gotten upset about this. Yes, get upset about this. And they've, been talking in our school board meetings about how they're going to Representative Tim Moffitt and to Senator Chuck Edwards and other legislatures and trying to saber rattle around this and really advocate for our students. And that's great. Can we do more of that? I'm glad you're upset about the calendar. That's a thing that, we can fix. Cool. But can we put some pressure on about the Leandro plan?
Mm-hmm.
Can we put pressure about actual policy that matters to our students? Longer term than just the calendar, which does matter, but probably isn't the thing to grandstand on if you're going to grandstand on something. So I definitely want to see us be more proactive on interacting with the state and being, making our voice heard as a district to the state. I've submitted a resolution in my written public comments on what our school board could do and pass a resolution that says, hey, North Carolina State Legislature, here's what we need for the Leandro plan. You're not fully funding it. Can you please do that? Granted, that doesn't buy us a ticket to get those monies immediately, but it definitely puts our intentions in writing and starts a conversation that means we're serious about this. And we're just not going to, it's not just our job to sit back and see what trickles down. We need to be proactive about what we want to see happen in our schools. Mm-hmm. And there's a policy memo that I worked with a recent college grad to put together for me to bring all the funding sources and the financial reasons for doing it is electrifying our fleet. So we see right now, of course, with diesel prices, gas prices, are bonkers currently, and they are subject to change all the time, costing us more money as we're operating our bus fleet to pick up kids across the county. And if you were to, as the buses naturally retire, phase in electric buses, which has a higher upfront cost, but pays for itself quickly, and also doesn't have particulate matter, while a bus is idling in front of a bunch of kids waiting for a school bus, breathing in smog that's going to trigger asthma or make them sick in other ways, or just generally it's just nicer to not have to hang out with a bunch of exhaust pipes while you're waiting to go home. There is money available right now at the state level. Transylvania County is one of 5 counties that applied for this money, and they just recently got their first school bus. We could certainly...
That's what I was looking up just now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm pretty sure, did they? And I was about to Google, I was like, I think Transylvania County got an electric
They are
bus,
one of them,
yeah.
right. And I heard some feedback from somebody when I posted that article that they were saying they'd considered buses before, but because of mountainous terrain, it was ill-advised. Transylvania County is more mountainous than we are.
Oh, yes. And it gets much more rural than Henderson County does at any point.
Electric cars are fantastic at torque. I mean, they are a joy to drive on the Blue Ridge Parkway because they hug curves in a way that,
Oh, I've never driven one.
Yeah, they are great.
That's fun.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, if you are doing fleet work, a bus route is the perfect vehicle, pun intended, for an electric car or electric automobile because you know exactly where it's going every day. A bus doesn't say ooh, you know what I want to do today? Drive to Folly Beach.
Right.
See ya. Now I got to plan out where I'm going to charge up. It's no, here's the route you take.
Right.
And then you plug back in. And there are incentives from Duke Energy, for instance, who want to do this. And the thing is, you can't clean up gasoline. You can clean up the electric grid. So, if you're eventually filling those buses with sunshine, fantastic. But we're not going to get there, through diesel or even through compressed natural gas. We get there through electrifying the fleet. The infrastructure is getting a boost now more than ever. And the fact that there are dollars sitting in Raleigh ready for, districts to be proactive on it, let's do more of that. I want to see our district get those dollars that Transylvania County is getting.
That was exciting to hear.
Yes.
So to pivot, we talked about your background, we talked about your platform, and we talked about things that you think that are going well and things that we can improve on. Specifically, I'd like to kind of pivot to the election itself.
Sure.
A little politics side of this.
Yeah.
It's no secret in Henderson County that you are the sole Democratic candidate running against how many others are on that?
So there are 9 of us running for 3 seats.
9 people running for 3 seats, and
Correct.
only one of them is a Democrat.
Yes, I would like to. I am a registered Democrat. I am also a common sense voice of reason.
Mm-hmm.
Some folks jumped in the race during the mask hoopla, and I'm curious to hear what their platforms are now that the mask situation has chilled out.
Mm-hmm.
2 folks are incumbents. They have a lot of name recognition. 1 seat is open because the previous occupant, or the current occupant, is heading to run for county commission. So, yeah, it's Mary Ellen and the 8 conservatives. That is correct. Yep.
And not to bottleneck, because I do want to kind of the personal choice for me is to not politicize education, but I understand that it's an elected position. So
Yes,
why
that's a good point. It's a weird, needle to thread. Yeah.
Right. And since it is an elected position, why are you a Democrat?
So I believe in public education. I'm fighting for public education because I believe in it. And Democrats have historically funded and cared about public education in a way that other folks haven't.
Well, that's all I have on that.
I rest my case, Your Honor. Yeah, I'm fighting to put kids first, and you don't do that by starving the resources of our public education. You don't do that by limiting the books they can read. You don't do that by freaking out over what bathroom they can go to. You do that by putting kids first and caring about who they are, where they are, and you meet them and their families where they are and serve them the best you can. And that is who I am, and that's what I believe in.
Is there anything specifically that you find disturbing, and that is an obstacle that you see that you may have to overcome when you're elected?
So I am very lucky to have a supportive family who's in it to win it with me. I have to say, though, when I started this conversation with my husband, he was like, so we need a security system.
Yeah.
And that comes directly from the ugliness that's happened over the last few years, right? People see your name and think they can be ugly to you if they don't disagree with you. People are welcome to disagree with me. My plea is that we all disagree with each other productively and civilly. Good things happen out of disagreement as long as we can come together and make it happen. But there are certainly folks who do not feel that way. People certainly do seem like they seem like they're empowered to not be their best selves on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been spilling over to real life in alarming ways, for sure. Yeah. But, frankly, I've written things that I stand behind, that I believe in, for jobs I've had and for causes I've been pushing for. And being a woman with a very feminine name, putting myself out there on the internet, people say gross things all the time. People come at you with nastiness and inappropriateness a lot. It doesn't excuse it, but it's not like it's like a shock that suddenly now I'm running for an office, that it's like, oh, people are going to be unkind? Yeah, I wish they weren't.
But this isn't your first rodeo.
This isn't my first rodeo being a human
Being a
woman.
Can you give listeners a call to action to support you or our public schools in general?
Absolutely. Yes. Give public comment to our school board. If there's something you want to say, show up at the meeting and say it. If you think that we need funding for our schools that fully funds the Leandro Plan, let your state legislatures know now, early and often. You can sign up to volunteer on my campaign at maryellen4hcps.com. Big volunteer button at the top. Big donate button in the middle. So, good thing about down ballot races to use a jargony term, but the smaller races, local elections, of which this is that your dollar goes really far. So a little bit of help goes a long way. And I've got a campaign right now on my campaign Facebook that is to raise $1,600 to get enough campaign signs to cover the county. So chip in, help us out. Time, treasure, and talent is all very much appreciated. So if you'd like to write postcards for my campaign or make phone calls closer to the fall, love your help. Sign up to volunteer on my website, and we'd be just thrilled to have you.
You're so naturally alliterative.
I'm.
Did you catch that?
Did I
Yes.
do it again?
Yeah.
Oh, time, treasure, and talent.
And she caught it, like, did the way back and found it. Nice.
Please give me all your money. Thanks. Bye.
That's also what we say.
Oh, no.
Voting for you, if folks are interested in actually voting for you to be on the Henderson County School Board, when is that election happening? When can they vote for you?
Awesome question. You can vote for me in early voting in October, or on election day, November 8th is when this election happens. Again, as we mentioned, there are 9 people running for 3 slots. Top 3 vote getters are on the school board. So this is a county-wide election, at large, nonpartisan, meaning if you live in Henderson County, I would be honored to have your vote. If you really want me to win, and I hope you do, vote for me and stop. It's a one and done request. So you have the opportunity to vote up for 3 people. If you really want to ensure that the common sense progressive voice gets on school board, do not dilute your vote. It's a little bit of, well, it's simple math. Make the denominator smaller. Like, 1/3 of the votes better than 1/4 of the votes, right? So vote for Mary Ellen and stop. Vote one and done.
So because if people vote for 2 other candidates, then those candidates, their vote pile is being added to, and they could supersede yours and get on without you.
Right.
Okay.
That's true.
Okay. I had to do
and people are welcome to vote for whoever they want to. If there's a second choice you love, go ahead and vote for.
Sure.
But if
that's...
you want to ensure that this common sense progressive voice is on school board, vote one and done.
Awesome to know.
One and
Okay,
done.
I mean, yeah.
Right. Maybe not exactly what your theories
So
are.
what I want to talk about. So
Yeah.
when a human comes to me and when this happened on Facebook, then I tried to answer it as a human.
When you say this, you mean when somebody asks you about
what do you think about critical race theory then? I trust our teachers to teach history. Not all history is pretty, and we're going to do that. And this was even before the critical race theory became this just catch-all phrase, which is what it has, because you can go the get your facts straight route of we don't teach it. It's not in our schools. Mm-hmm. But if there's a person that's not typing at me but stands in front of me and says, "What do you think about critical race theory?" I'd say, "Great question. What is critical race theory?"
Yeah.
What's bothering you?
What do you understand it to be?
And let me answer your question, because I want to answer what you're asking me. It just reminds, it's another manufactured controversy, and it's not something that our teachers and students are actually grappling with. Our schools are a good thing where it doesn't matter your political background. You come together, you get kids what they need. You don't need to be inserting boogeymen where they don't belong.
This episode is brought to you by Oklawaha Brewing Company. Oklawaha Brewing is a nano brewery and taproom committed to brewing high-quality beer in a vibrant atmosphere and is conveniently located in downtown Hendersonville. Drop in sometime and check it out.
That's all the time we have this week, folks. That sounds weird as fuck. That's all the time we have this week, folks. We're busy. Okay. That's all the time we have this week, folks. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. It just takes a click.
Too true, and we are a fully donation-based platform that would love to start streaming everywhere, but that takes licensing, and licensing takes money.
Donations to help us reach our goal of being a widely accessible platform can be accepted on our Patreon at patreon.com/fireonthemountainpod. Hold on, I'm going to redo that.
Mountain, because I said MTN. Damn, fuck, my bad.
Is it mountain spelled
It is
out?
mountain spelled
Okay. Donations to help us reach our goal of being a widely accessible platform can be accepted on our Patreon at
patreon.com/Fire on the Mountain Pod.
We will surprise monthly donors of $5 or more with outtakes, merchandise, videos, and
All the love in our hearts.
thanks again for listening, everyone.
Cool.
Is that good?